called a Picardy third. Just like that. If you can see it. And basically all a Picardy third is the very last chord of a piece, all right? This is when you find it, it's the last chord of the piece. Instead of, in a minor key, playing minor 1, we raise the third and play a major 1. That's all it is, all right? So instead of a minor 1 chord, right, in this D minor, so D, F natural, A, minor 1 chord, we borrow the F sharp, the third, right? We borrow the key signature from D major, right? This guy right here. And we slap it onto this chord, all right? So we add an F sharp and raise it up to a major chord, all right? So this is a throwback from the Renaissance era, at a time when it was considered that ending on a minor 1 chord wasn't enough of a sort of conclusion for a piece when you're in a minor key. So they would raise that third and make it feel like a real conclusion. So that's the Picardy third. It's the only instance when you're going to find borrowed chords in a minor key. It's found at the end of a piece. So that's it. So if we move on, so these are just more examples of how borrowed chords are used in context, basically. Yeah, and again, as far as circle progressions go, they're just going to function just like they would if it were a major 4 chord. The minor doesn't make any difference. So changing its quality doesn't actually change how it functions in the key, if that makes sense. So, all right. Well, the other opposite example of this is there is one instance where where we actually switch and used a borrowed chord in a minor key, all right? And that is known as something called a Picardy third. So it's called a Picardy third. Just like that. If you can see it. And basically all a Picardy third is the very last chord of a piece, all right? This is when you find it, it's the last chord of the piece. Instead of, in a minor key, playing minor 1, we raise the third and play a major 1. That's all it is, all right? So instead of a minor 1 chord, right, in this D minor, so D, F natural, A, minor 1 chord, we borrow the F sharp, the third, right? We borrow the key signature from D major, right? This guy right here. And we slap it onto this chord, all right? So we add an F sharp and raise it up to a major chord, all right? So this is a throwback from the Renaissance era, at a time when it was considered that ending on a minor 1 chord wasn't enough of a sort of conclusion for a piece when you're in a minor key. So they would raise that third and make it feel like a real conclusion. So that's the Picardy third. It's the only instance when you're going to find borrowed chords in a minor key. It's found at the end of a piece. So that's it. Okay, so when we're dealing with doubling and voice leading, doubling just means that okay, so when we're dealing with doubling and voice leading, doubling just means when you're dealing with a triad, you know, which which note are you going to also double when you're dealing with 4-part voicing. Okay, so with the 2 chord, diminished 2 chord, so in D major, it's most likely seen in first inversion, right? So we've got 2 diminished 6. So you're going to see it written out as this. And then the E, that would be the root of the chord, pops up here, right? Because the G has to be in the bass because it's first inversion. And we add our B flat. So put a flat on it, put a B flat on it. All right? So generally what you're going to do is double the bass. So whatever the bass is, not the root. The bass is going to get doubled. So you're going to add another G on top. Right? And obviously this would be spread out over 2 staves, right? So you'd have treble clef and bass clef, and they'd be all spread out like you normally see it written out. I'm too lazy to do that. So, 2 diminished 6, it's going to double the root, or double the bass. Okay? Now, when resolving it, generally it's going to move to 5 or 5/7. All right? And what's going to happen is the bass is going to move up a step. All right? So normal voice leading stuff applies. And then everything else is going to go in contrary motion down a step. Okay? Fairly clear. And it resolves to 5 or 5/7. Now, the 2-6-5 chord, which is basically just the same chord, but with a 7th added onto it, right? It's going to be the exact same rules, except you don't have to deal with doubling because you've got 4 notes. So there's our B flat, so our E comes down from here. Now we've got 4 notes in our chord, so it's going to be 2 diminished 6/5. Right? So it's still first inversion. So we don't have to worry about doubling because we've already got 4 notes to deal with. It is also most likely going to resolve to 5 or a 5/7. So either or, okay? Very commonly. And it's going to do the exact same thing. Bass is going to come up. Everything else is going to go in contrary motion and resolve down again. Okay? Same exact deal. Now, our 4 chord is going to be exactly the same as the 2 chords. All right? So our 4 chord, which is going to start on G. So we've got minor 4, G, B flat, D, just like that. Okay? G, B flat, D. We are going to double the root. So you're most likely going to see it in root position. So we double the root, so pop the G up there, okay? And then it's most likely going to resolve to 5 or 5/7. And it's going to do the same exact resolution as a 2. So the bass is going to come up. Going to resolve up, and then the other 3 voices are going to go down in contrary motion. All right? Now, flatted 6th is going to be a little different. Again, we're going to see it in root position most likely. Flatted 6th. So we just lose the G, come up here. So B flat, D, and then the F natural, because we're borrowing the key, so we get rid of the F sharp. Okay? Now, in this case, we are again going to always double the root. Okay, so we're going to pop up and put our B flat in here. So another B flat. And then, instead of resolving up, because we've got a half step down to the A, which is the 5th, and again, this one is most likely to resolve to 5 or 5/7. But to do that, we're perfectly set up to resolve down to our 5 by just going down a half step. So in this case, we're going to resolve down to A rather than resolving up to A, right? So in this case, we end up with A. If we resolve down to A, we get a nice 5 chord. And because we want to keep contrary motion going, everything else, the other 3 voices, are going to resolve up instead of down. But still, again, it's going to be the same contrary motion. All right? Okie dokie. And then our last 2 chords are the minor 7th chord. So a nice little 7, diminished 7. Now, it's a little bit strange. In our book, it says that you're most likely to see the 7th chord in root position, all right? And then if you go back a few pages to where we were on 72, in this little chart, it says that the most common way you're going to see diminished 7th chord is in first inversion, or also common 2nd and 3rd inversion. But according to the doubling and voice leading applications, you're going to see it in root position. So I say it's probably common to see it in all 4 positions, right? That's what I'm going to say. So in diminished 7, we're going to deal with it in root position right now. You will see it in all 4 ways, okay? So usually, let's see. All right, so normally you've got to resolve both of these tritones. So in D major, our diminished 7th chord is going to be C sharp, C sharp, E, G, B flat. Remember, we can have the C sharp because of D harmonic minor. That's the leading tone. All right, so we're going to resolve the tritones. Generally, what's going to happen is the C sharp is going to resolve up to root position. All right, so it's going to go up to the D, and your 7th chord is going to resolve to a 1 chord. All right, so the C sharp is going to resolve up to the D, and then everything else, at least 2 of the notes have to resolve down. All right, so these guys are going to go in contrary motion. At least 2 of them. One of them can probably stay if it fits into the chord. Yeah. So that's it. So any questions? Yeah, so the bass is going to move up. Top 3 are going to move in contrary motion. Now, finally, in our Picardy 3rd, so we're going to take this out. Now we've switched keys. We're in D minor, because we find Picardy 3rds in minor keys. So we have D minor, key of B flat, and our Picardy 3rd, which is going to be a major 1 chord. So D, F sharp, A. So put a sharp on it in this case. We're borrowing D major for a chord. So usually we see it in root position, and you're going to just always double the bass, okay? So double the bass, which is also the root, because you rarely ever see it any other way. And it's always the ending of a piece, so you're never going to see it having to voice lead to something, although I will say you're almost always going to see it coming from a 5. This is usually used only in a perfect authentic cadence, all right? You'll see it coming from a 5 or a 5/7. But you don't have to worry about the voice leading practice of it, just because it's always going to be found at the very end of a piece. So that's the end.